Husband shoved her face into her 30th birthday cake and divorced her while his parents mocked her, unaware she was the secret billionaire heiress. What happened at the biggest investors' meeting 3 weeks later left them bankrupt and begging for mercy. The grand ballroom sparkled with golden lights as guests gathered to celebrate her 30th birthday. She smiled as the beautiful cake was rolled to the center of the room, believing the evening was a surprise arranged by her loving husband. She had no idea that within the next few minutes, her marriage would end in the most humiliating way imaginable. Just as everyone began singing "Happy Birthday," her husband suddenly took the microphone and asked for silence. Instead of wishing his wife a happy birthday, he called a glamorous young woman to stand beside him. Wrapping his arm around her waist, he proudly introduced her as the woman he truly loved and announced that she would soon become his new wife. The room fell silent for a heartbeat before his parents burst into laughter, applauding the shocking announcement and mocking their stunned daughter-in-law. Before she could even process what was happening, her husband grabbed the back of her head and violently shoved her face into her own birthday cake. Frosting covered her face as the guests gasped. His parents laughed even harder, insulting her, calling her a failure, and telling everyone she had never deserved to be part of their family. Then came the final blow. Her husband pulled a set of divorce papers from his jacket, threw them onto the table, and demanded that she sign them immediately so he could begin a new life with the woman standing beside him. Fighting back tears, she signed without saying a word, quietly walked out of the ballroom, and disappeared into the night. The laughter continued long after she left, because everyone believed they had finally rid themselves of a worthless woman. But they had no idea they had just humiliated the secret heiress to a billionaire fortune whose family controlled investments worth billions of dollars. 3 weeks later, at the biggest investors' meeting of the year, the same husband, his arrogant parents, and the woman he had proudly introduced walked into the boardroom expecting the greatest business deal of their lives. Instead, they froze in disbelief. Sitting at the head of the table was the very woman they had publicly humiliated. What happened next destroyed their fortune, bankrupted their family, and left them begging for mercy from the one person they had treated with none. Stay until the end, because this incredible story only becomes more shocking from here. The grand ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers that cast warm golden light across polished marble floors. Fresh white roses lined every table, a live orchestra played softly in the background, and servers moved gracefully among hundreds of distinguished guests carrying silver trays filled with sparkling drinks. Everything about the evening reflected elegance and wealth. Friends, business associates, and members of the city's elite had gathered to celebrate Vanessa Carter's 30th birthday. Standing near the towering 5-tier birthday cake, Vanessa smiled politely as guests congratulated her. She wore a graceful emerald green evening gown that matched her calm personality. To everyone around her, she looked like a woman who had finally found happiness. She believed her husband, Daniel Brooks, had organized the extravagant celebration because he wanted to make her milestone birthday unforgettable. She couldn't have been more wrong. For weeks, Daniel had acted unusually attentive. He had brought her flowers, cancelled late-night meetings, and even apologized for the arguments that had slowly poisoned their marriage during the previous year. Vanessa had wanted to believe that people could change. She had ignored the late-night phone calls, the perfume that didn't belong to her, and the growing emotional distance between them. Deep inside, however, a quiet voice had warned her that something was terribly wrong. That same quiet voice returned as she noticed Daniel repeatedly checking his expensive watch. He wasn't nervous. He was waiting. Across the ballroom, his parents exchanged knowing smiles with several guests. His mother, Patricia Brooks, whispered something to her husband, Richard, and both struggled to suppress amused expressions. Vanessa noticed it but dismissed it. She had spent 5 years trying to earn their acceptance. No matter how hard she tried, Patricia constantly reminded her that she came from an ordinary background. "You should be grateful Daniel married you," Patricia had once told her. "Women like you don't usually get opportunities like this." Vanessa simply smiled that day. She had smiled many times. What Patricia never knew was that Vanessa had been protecting a promise she made to her late grandmother years earlier. "Never use your family's name to gain love," her grandmother had whispered while holding her hand in a quiet hospital room. "The right people will value your heart before your wealth. The wrong people will expose themselves without realizing it." Vanessa had carried those words into adulthood. After inheriting the Carter family fortune, she quietly declined every public announcement introducing her as the heiress. Instead, professional trustees managed the family's massive investment empire while she lived an intentionally modest life. Even Daniel had never asked detailed questions about her past. He assumed she had grown up with little money because she never flaunted expensive jewelry or talked about powerful relatives. The orchestra suddenly stopped playing. Every conversation faded into silence. Daniel stepped onto the small stage beside the birthday cake and accepted a microphone from the event host. "My friends," he announced with a confident smile, "before we cut the cake, I have something much more important to share." The guests applauded. Vanessa smiled uncertainly. Perhaps he had prepared a heartfelt speech after all. Daniel looked toward the entrance. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like everyone to welcome someone very special." The ballroom doors opened. A striking young woman wearing a glittering silver gown walked confidently into the room. Her long black hair rested perfectly on her shoulders, and she smiled as though she already belonged there. Vanessa frowned. She recognized her. Her name was Chloe Mitchell. Daniel had introduced Chloe months earlier as a marketing consultant working on one of his projects. Vanessa remembered how Chloe always seemed unusually comfortable around her husband. She remembered finding Chloe's bracelet inside Daniel's car. She remembered the mysterious dinner meetings that always seemed to run late. Suddenly, every unanswered question found its answer. Daniel walked toward Chloe without hesitation. Then, before everyone, he wrapped his arm around her waist. "I've spent too many years pretending," he declared. "Tonight I want to be honest. Chloe is the woman I truly love." The ballroom became perfectly still. Vanessa's heartbeat thundered inside her chest. Daniel continued speaking. "We've been together for almost a year. I should have ended my unhappy marriage much sooner." A ripple of shocked whispers spread through the audience. Patricia Brooks laughed first. Then Richard joined her. Soon several guests awkwardly forced polite smiles, uncertain whether they were witnessing an elaborate joke or something far more disturbing. Chloe leaned comfortably against Daniel, as though she had rehearsed this moment many times. "I'm tired of living a lie," Daniel continued. "So tonight, in front of everyone who matters to me, I'd like to introduce my future wife." Patricia clapped enthusiastically. "Finally," she shouted, "now that's the daughter-in-law we've always wanted." Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Vanessa felt her legs weaken. 5 years. 5 years of believing love required patience. 5 years of defending Daniel whenever friends questioned his increasingly selfish behavior. 5 years of trying to earn acceptance from people who had secretly despised her from the beginning. Daniel looked directly into her eyes. "I'm done pretending, Vanessa." His voice carried no guilt, only relief. "You've always been too ordinary for the life I want." Chloe smirked. "I told you she'd just stand there," she whispered loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Patricia laughed again. "I've seen more confidence in our housekeeper." The humiliation spread through the ballroom like wildfire. Phones quietly appeared beneath tables as guests secretly recorded everything. Daniel slowly reached inside his suit jacket. Vanessa desperately wanted him to pull out an apology. Instead, he removed a thick envelope. He tossed it onto the birthday table. The papers slid across the white tablecloth until they stopped beside the untouched birthday cake. "Divorce papers," Daniel announced. "I've already signed them." Vanessa stared silently at the documents. Her wedding ring suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. Somewhere in the ballroom, an elderly businessman quietly shook his head. He had seen corporate betrayals. He had witnessed hostile takeovers. But he had never seen a husband publicly destroy his wife on her birthday. Yet even he couldn't imagine that this humiliation was only the beginning. Because somewhere across the city, inside the headquarters of Carter Global Holdings, a confidential board meeting had already been scheduled for exactly 3 weeks later. Invitations had been sent only to the world's most influential investors. Hidden inside sealed legal files rested documents bearing one signature that would determine the future of billions of dollars and the fate of Daniel Brooks' entire family. Neither Daniel nor his parents knew their company's survival depended on the quiet woman standing before them. And within minutes, they were about to make a mistake from which there would be no escape. Vanessa lowered her eyes to the divorce papers resting beside the birthday cake. The room was so quiet that even the gentle hum of the air conditioning seemed unusually loud. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on her, waiting to see whether she would scream, cry, or beg. Daniel expected all three. Instead, she simply looked at him. The man standing before her hardly resembled the young entrepreneur she had fallen in love with 6 years earlier. Back then, Daniel had been ambitious but humble. He drove an old sedan, dreamed of building a respected investment firm, and spoke endlessly about honesty, loyalty, and growing old together. She remembered the rainy afternoon when they first met outside a neighborhood bookstore. Daniel had accidentally dropped a stack of business journals into a puddle, and she had laughed while helping him gather the soaked pages. They spent hours talking in a nearby cafe, discovering they both loved biographies of great entrepreneurs. He never asked about her family's history, and she never volunteered it. For the first time in her life, someone seemed interested in Vanessa rather than the Carter name. She had treasured that feeling. When Daniel proposed beneath a quiet oak tree overlooking a lake, he held out a modest ring and promised, "I may never become rich, but I'll spend every day making you feel like the richest woman alive." She had believed every word. Now those promises echoed inside her mind like ghosts. Daniel snapped his fingers impatiently. "Sign them, Vanessa." She looked down at the papers once more. Patricia folded her arms with a smug smile. "Don't make this difficult. We all know this marriage has been a mistake." Richard chuckled. She should thank Daniel for giving her 5 years she never deserved. A few guests lowered their heads in embarrassment. Others remained frozen, unwilling to interfere. Then Chloe stepped closer. "I've already picked out the honeymoon resort," she said sweetly. "Daniel and I didn't think it was appropriate to wait." Soft laughter spread through Patricia's circle of friends. Vanessa took a slow breath. She realized something in that moment. None of these people knew her. Not really. They knew the quiet woman who preferred simple dresses over designer labels. They knew the wife who volunteered at children's hospitals instead of attending celebrity galas. They knew the woman who drove an ordinary car even though she could have owned a fleet of luxury vehicles. But they knew nothing about the countless businesses her family quietly owned. Nothing about the investment empire carefully managed behind the scenes. Nothing about the annual board meetings held under strict confidentiality. Nothing about the document currently locked inside Carter Global Holdings' legal vault, naming her as the sole controlling beneficiary after her grandmother's estate officially completed its final transition. The transition would become effective in exactly 3 weeks. Her grandmother had designed it that way. "You must first live as an ordinary person," Elena Carter had insisted years ago. "Only then will you know who truly belongs in your life." At the time, Vanessa thought the condition seemed unnecessary. Now it made perfect sense. Daniel mistook her silence for weakness. "What's wrong?" he mocked. "Can't believe no one wants you anymore." He picked up a silver cake knife and sliced the first piece. Then he smiled cruelly. "I almost forgot." Before Vanessa could react, Daniel grabbed the back of her head. Several guests gasped. His grip tightened. Then, with shocking force, he shoved her face straight into the center of the enormous birthday cake. Cream exploded across the table. Flowers toppled onto the floor. The orchestra members stood frozen in horror. Vanessa's forehead struck the soft layers before she instinctively pulled herself free. White frosting covered her face and hair. The ballroom erupted. Patricia laughed so hard that tears rolled down her cheeks. Richard slapped his knee. Chloe covered her mouth, pretending to be shocked before bursting into laughter herself. Someone applauded. Another guest whispered, "This is unbelievable." Camera phones rose higher. Every second of the humiliation was being recorded. Vanessa slowly wiped frosting from her eyes. She looked at Daniel. Not with hatred. Not with anger. With disappointment. Deep disappointment. "I truly loved you," she said quietly. Daniel rolled his eyes. "And I stopped loving you a long time ago." "I know." Her calm answer confused him. "You know." She nodded. "I just hoped the man I married would eventually remember who he used to be." For the first time that evening, Daniel hesitated. Only for a second. Then Patricia interrupted. "Enough drama, tell her to sign." Daniel pushed the divorce papers toward Vanessa once more. She reached for the pen. Several guests leaned forward. Without arguing. Without negotiating. Without asking for a single dollar. She signed every page. Daniel blinked. "That's it." She placed the pen beside the documents. "That's it." He laughed triumphantly. "I knew you'd finally accept reality." Vanessa slowly removed her wedding ring. She looked at it for a long moment before placing it on top of the signed papers. "I entered this marriage with love," she said softly. "I'm leaving it with peace." Chloe wrapped both arms around Daniel. "You see, I told you she'd give up." Vanessa ignored her. Instead, she turned toward Patricia and Richard. "I spent 5 years trying to become part of your family." Patricia shrugged. "You failed." "No," Vanessa replied calmly. "I simply spent 5 years learning exactly who you are." Her words carried an unusual certainty. Richard frowned. Something about her composure felt unsettling. She wasn't behaving like someone who had lost everything. She looked relieved. Vanessa picked up her small handbag. Nothing more. She didn't ask for jewelry. She didn't ask for gifts. She didn't even ask for dignity. As she walked toward the ballroom entrance, the elderly businessman who had silently observed everything stepped into her path. His name was Harold Whitmore, one of the country's most respected investors. Few people noticed him because he rarely sought attention. He quietly offered Vanessa a clean handkerchief. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She accepted it with a grateful smile. "Thank you." Harold studied her face carefully. There was something strangely familiar about her eyes. He had seen them before. Years ago. In another boardroom. Beside another remarkable woman. Before he could remember where, Vanessa gently nodded and continued walking away. The ballroom doors closed behind her. Silence lingered for only a moment. Then music resumed. Champagne flowed again. Patricia raised her glass. Now, she announced proudly, let's celebrate Daniel and Chloe's future. Guests applauded politely. But across the room, Harold Whitmore never joined the celebration. Instead, he stared toward the closed doors, his memory finally awakening. Those eyes. They belonged to Elena Carter. His face slowly lost its color. No, he whispered under his breath. That can't be possible. Across town, a black luxury sedan quietly stopped outside a private estate, hidden behind towering iron gates. The guards recognized the woman stepping from the waiting car immediately. Without a word, they opened the gates. Inside the mansion, executives, attorneys, and trustees had already assembled in the library. They had been waiting for her. The oldest trustee stood as Vanessa entered, still wearing traces of birthday cake in her hair. No one laughed. No one asked questions. Instead, he respectfully bowed his head. Welcome home, Miss Carter. The room fell silent. Then he placed a sealed leather portfolio on the table. It's time, he said. The preparations for the investors' meeting are complete. 3 weeks from tonight, the empire officially becomes yours. The words hung in the air with quiet authority. It's time, 3 weeks from tonight, the empire officially becomes yours. Vanessa stood motionless for several seconds, still wearing the emerald gown from what had begun as her birthday celebration and ended as the public destruction of her marriage. Streaks of dried frosting remained in her hair, a painful reminder of the humiliation she had endured less than an hour earlier. Without saying a word, she removed the elegant earrings Daniel had given her on their first wedding anniversary and placed them beside the leather portfolio. They belong to the past, she said quietly. No one in the room interrupted her. Around the long mahogany table sat some of the most respected legal minds and financial strategists in the country. Many of them had served the Carter family for decades. Several had watched Vanessa grow from a bright, curious little girl into the disciplined woman standing before them. They had also honored Elena Carter's final instructions. No one was permitted to reveal Vanessa's identity until every condition in the family trust had been fulfilled. The elderly trustee, Samuel Bennett, adjusted his glasses. Your grandmother believed tonight would reveal the truth. Vanessa gave a faint smile. She was right. Samuel slowly opened the leather portfolio. Inside were ownership certificates, voting rights agreements, acquisition schedules, and confidential reports covering dozens of multinational corporations. Near the top rested a single file marked Brooks Capital Group. Vanessa's eyes settled on it. Samuel slid it toward her. You should read this first. She opened the folder. Each page revealed numbers that painted a grim picture. Daniel's company wasn't thriving. It was drowning. For nearly 2 years, Brooks Capital had survived only because Carter Global Holdings had quietly extended emergency credit through layers of subsidiary investment funds. Daniel believed foreign investors were supporting his expansion. He was completely unaware those funds ultimately belonged to the Carter family. If the financing disappeared, his company would collapse within weeks. Vanessa slowly closed the file. So he never knew. No. Samuel shook his head. Neither did his accountants. Another executive spoke. 3 weeks from now, every temporary funding agreement expires. And unless the new chairperson renews them, another director added carefully. The company enters immediate default. Silence filled the room. Vanessa looked toward the large windows overlooking the estate gardens. She remembered another conversation years earlier. She had been 16. Elena Carter had taken her for a walk through the same gardens after reading newspaper headlines about a ruthless billionaire who had deliberately bankrupted hundreds of employees to punish one dishonest executive. Wealth is dangerous, Elena had said. It allows people to confuse revenge with justice. What should I do if someone hurts me? Young Vanessa had asked. Her grandmother smiled gently. Never destroy innocent people just to reach the guilty. Those words returned now with remarkable clarity. I won't punish his employees, Vanessa said. Several executives exchanged relieved glances. Samuel nodded approvingly. Your grandmother would be proud. I'll hold accountable only those who knowingly participated. She looked down again at Brooks Capital's records. There must be another way. There is, Samuel replied. He handed her another report. The investors' meeting. Vanessa opened it. The annual Carter Global Investors Summit wasn't simply another corporate conference. It was the most influential investment gathering in the country. Every major bank, every pension fund, every institutional investor, every strategic partner, everyone who mattered would be present. For decades, the meeting had shaped billions of dollars in future investments. This year would be different, because the retiring trustees would officially announce the Carter family's new controlling chairperson. Until then, only 6 people in the world knew that person was Vanessa. Samuel closed another folder. Harold Whitmore confirmed his attendance. Vanessa looked up. The gentleman from tonight. He has been one of your grandmother's closest business partners for nearly 30 years. He recognized me. Samuel smiled. He recognized your grandmother in you. Across the city, meanwhile, Daniel's celebration was continuing long past midnight. Music echoed throughout the ballroom as champagne bottles emptied one after another. Patricia proudly toasted her son. To new beginnings. Everyone raised their glasses. Daniel laughed confidently. I should have divorced Vanessa years ago. Chloe kissed his cheek. Now we don't have to hide anymore. Richard leaned closer. Have you told the investors she'll be gone before the summit? Daniel grinned. They'll love it. Why? Because they'll finally see I'm focused on business instead of carrying dead weight. Patricia laughed. Exactly. None of them noticed Harold Whitmore quietly leaving the ballroom. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't congratulate anyone. He simply walked to his waiting chauffeur. Once inside the car, he removed an old leather notebook from his briefcase. Between its pages rested a faded photograph taken nearly 25 years earlier. Standing beside Elena Carter was a little girl wearing a white dress. Her smile was unmistakable. Harold compared the photograph with the woman he had seen hours earlier. There was no doubt. His hands trembled. Driver. Yes, sir. Take me to Carter Estate. At this hour. Immediately. The sedan disappeared into the night. Back at the estate, dawn slowly approached. Vanessa hadn't slept. Instead, she spent the entire night reviewing company reports. One document after another revealed disturbing patterns. Daniel hadn't merely been arrogant. He had been reckless. He approved risky acquisitions without proper review. He diverted corporate funds into extravagant personal expenses. He ignored compliance warnings. Worst of all, someone inside Brooks Capital had been secretly manipulating financial statements presented to investors. Vanessa frowned. This signature. Samuel looked over her shoulder. Chief Financial Officer. No. She tapped the page. Someone forced him to approve these numbers. You think he's innocent? I think someone higher up wanted these reports altered. Samuel's expression grew thoughtful. If that's true, the truth will surface at the summit. Outside, the first rays of sunlight illuminated the Carter estate. Vanessa finally closed the last folder. She stood and walked toward her grandmother's portrait hanging above the fireplace. For several moments, she simply looked at it. I wanted a family, she whispered. I never wanted revenge. The painted eyes seemed almost alive in the morning light. Then she smiled softly. But I will protect what you built. Behind her, Samuel quietly spoke. The wardrobe team will arrive this afternoon. She looked back. The wardrobe team. You'll need appropriate attire for the investors' summit. A faint smile crossed Vanessa's face. For the first time, Samuel returned the smile. The world will finally meet Vanessa Carter. 3 weeks remained. 3 weeks for Daniel Brooks to celebrate what he believed was the greatest victory of his life. 3 weeks before the boardroom doors opened. 3 weeks before the signatures changed. 3 weeks before fortunes shifted. And 3 weeks before the man who had shoved his wife's face into her birthday cake would discover that he had publicly humiliated the one woman standing between his empire and complete financial ruin. 3 weeks passed far more quickly than Daniel Brooks could have imagined. To him, life had never looked brighter. The divorce had been finalized without dispute. Chloe had moved into the luxurious home that Vanessa had once cared for with quiet devotion. Patricia had redecorated nearly every room, proudly telling visitors that the house finally looked worthy of the Brooks family. Every trace of Vanessa's presence had been removed. Her photographs disappeared from the walls, her favorite books were packed into storage, and even the flowers she had planted in the garden were dug up and replaced. It feels like we've started over, Patricia declared one afternoon as she admired the renovated living room. Richard nodded approvingly. We got rid of the dead weight. Daniel smiled as he adjusted his expensive Italian suit in the hallway mirror. I told you everything would work out. Chloe slipped her arm through his. And after today's investors' meeting, you'll be the most influential businessman in the room. Daniel believed her. For weeks, he had anticipated the annual Carter Global Investors Summit. Every major investment decision affecting his company's future depended on that meeting. Although he had never met the mysterious individuals controlling Carter Global Holdings, he considered himself one of their most promising business partners. His confidence was built on a dangerous illusion. He still believed the generous lines of credit sustaining Brooks Capital came from anonymous international investment funds competing for his business. He never imagined every dollar had originated from the Carter family. As their limousine approached the magnificent Carter Global Convention Center, Daniel gazed through the tinted window at the rows of luxury vehicles arriving one after another. This is it, he said confidently. The biggest deal of my career. The massive glass building towered over the city skyline. News reporters crowded outside the entrance, interviewing executives arriving from different countries. Television cameras captured every handshake, every arrival, and every familiar face in the corporate world. Daniel stepped from the limousine wearing a smile that suggested absolute certainty. Photographers immediately recognized him. Mr. Brooks, this way. One photo, please. He confidently posed beside Chloe, while Patricia and Richard stood proudly behind them. Inside the convention center, hundreds of executives filled the enormous reception hall beneath towering ceilings decorated with crystal lighting. Giant digital displays welcomed investors to the annual summit, while security officers carefully verified every invitation. Harold Whitmore stood quietly near one of the windows, watching Daniel enter. Their eyes briefly met. Daniel walked over with a broad smile. "Mr. Whitmore, it's good to see you again." Harold offered only a polite nod. "I heard about your birthday celebration." Daniel laughed. "I suppose news travels fast." "It certainly does." "It was necessary," Daniel replied without embarrassment. "Sometimes you have to remove people who no longer belong in your future." Harold studied him for several silent seconds. Then he asked one simple question. "Do you always mistake loyalty for weakness?" Daniel frowned. "I'm not sure what you mean." "You will." Harold turned and walked away before Daniel could respond. Chloe frowned. "What was that about?" Daniel shrugged dismissively. "Old businessmen enjoy speaking in riddles." Neither of them noticed Harold quietly shaking his head with disappointment. Across the building, inside a private executive suite hidden behind secure doors, Vanessa stood before a full-length mirror. She hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. She wore a perfectly tailored ivory business suit that reflected quiet authority rather than extravagance. A single strand of pearls rested gracefully around her neck, pearls that had belonged to Elena Carter decades earlier. Her hair was elegantly styled, and every detail reflected the dignity her grandmother had always carried. Samuel Bennett entered with several board members. "They're all here." Vanessa took a slow breath. "How many?" "Nearly 700 investors." "And Brooks Capital?" "They arrived 20 minutes ago." She nodded. "Good." One of the attorneys stepped forward, holding a sealed envelope. "The official appointment resolution." Vanessa accepted it carefully. This single document transferred complete controlling authority of Carter Global Holdings into her hands. It represented decades of planning, decades of sacrifice, decades of responsibility. Samuel smiled gently. "Your grandmother always believed this moment would define you." Vanessa looked toward the closed doors. "I hope I don't disappoint her." "You won't." A young assistant hurried into the room. "Ma'am." Everyone turned toward her. "The board is assembled." "And the media." "They're waiting outside the main auditorium." Samuel extended his hand toward the doors. "Whenever you're ready." Meanwhile, inside the vast conference hall, executives found their assigned seats. Daniel sat comfortably near the front beside Chloe, Patricia, and Richard. "This placement tells you everything," Patricia whispered proudly. "They know exactly how important we are." Daniel smiled. "I wouldn't be surprised if they announce our expansion partnership today." Richard leaned back confidently. "They'd be foolish not to." At precisely 10 o'clock, the lights dimmed. The enormous hall fell silent. A distinguished master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the annual Carter Global Investors Summit." Applause filled the auditorium. For over 40 years, Carter Global Holdings has quietly shaped industries across the world through disciplined investment, responsible leadership, and long-term partnerships. Massive screens displayed historic images of the company's remarkable growth. Daniel watched with eager anticipation. The presenter continued. "As many of you know, today also marks the official retirement of the Carter Family Trust's final transitional board." Another round of applause echoed through the hall. Before discussing this year's investment strategy, it is my honor to introduce the new chairperson and controlling owner of Carter Global Holdings. The auditorium became perfectly still. Daniel leaned forward. "So this is the mysterious successor," Chloe whispered. Patricia smiled confidently. "I can't wait to see who controls all this money." The stage lights slowly faded. A single spotlight illuminated the entrance at the side of the auditorium. The doors opened. Elegant footsteps echoed across the silent hall. Daniel glanced casually toward the entrance. Then his smile disappeared. His breathing stopped. His entire body froze. Patricia's eyes widened in horror. Richard instinctively gripped the arms of his chair. Chloe stared in complete disbelief. Walking calmly toward the stage was the last person any of them expected to see. Vanessa. Gone was the broken woman who had quietly walked away with birthday cake covering her face. The woman approaching the podium radiated confidence, dignity, and unmistakable authority. Every member of the board rose to their feet. Then, one after another, hundreds of executives throughout the auditorium stood with them. A thunderous standing ovation filled the room. Daniel could only whisper one word. Vanessa. His voice was barely audible. But the nightmare he had unknowingly created was only just beginning. Daniel remained frozen as the applause rolled through the auditorium like thunder. It wasn't the polite applause reserved for a guest speaker. It was the kind of welcome given to someone whose signature could shape industries and determine the future of fortunes. Vanessa walked with calm, measured steps toward the podium. Every member of the board remained standing until she reached the center of the stage. Samuel Bennett accepted the sealed appointment resolution from the attorney and faced the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, by the unanimous decision of the Carter Family Trust, and in accordance with the final wishes of the late Elena Carter, it is my privilege to present the sole controlling owner, chairperson, and chief executive of Carter Global Holdings. He paused. Ms. Vanessa Carter. The applause became even louder. Daniel's face drained of color. No, he whispered. This isn't possible. Patricia grabbed his arm. Say something. Richard stared at the stage in disbelief. The Carter family. He suddenly remembered the name. Years ago, Elena Carter had quietly rescued dozens of failing companies without seeking public recognition. Richard had attended one of those meetings as a junior executive. He had never imagined the quiet daughter-in-law he mocked every day belonged to that family. On stage, Vanessa accepted the appointment documents. She looked across the audience. Her eyes briefly met Daniel's. There was no hatred in them, only quiet resolve. After thanking the trustees, she began speaking. My grandmother taught me that wealth is not measured by the size of a bank account, but by the character of the person entrusted with it. The hall fell silent. She also believed every investment should strengthen honest businesses and protect hardworking employees. Several executives nodded. For that reason, the board has completed a comprehensive review of every company receiving financial support from Carter Global Holdings. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. Vanessa continued. Some organizations demonstrated integrity and responsible leadership. A large screen displayed a list of companies approved for expanded investment. Brooks Capital was nowhere on the screen. Daniel frowned. Vanessa calmly turned another page. Unfortunately, our review also uncovered serious violations within several partner organizations. The screen changed. An independent audit report appeared. At the top, Brooks Capital Group. Gasps echoed through the auditorium. The report detailed reckless financial decisions, manipulated disclosures, misuse of corporate resources, and repeated violations of fiduciary responsibility by senior leadership. Daniel shot to his feet. That's a lie. Samuel spoke before anyone else could. The report was prepared by 3 independent auditing firms over the past 18 months. Another board member added, "Every finding has been verified." Vanessa never raised her voice. For the protection of investors, employees, and shareholders, Carter Global Holdings is terminating all financial facilities, acquisition negotiations, and investment agreements with Brooks Capital, effective immediately. A collective murmur swept through the room. Daniel felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. No. He hurriedly opened his tablet and accessed the company's financial dashboard. One notification after another appeared. Credit facility suspended. Investment agreement terminated. Emergency liquidity withdrawn. His phone began vibrating. Then again, and again. His chief financial officer, the operations director, legal counsel, the head of banking relations. He answered the first call. Daniel. The CFO sounded panicked. The banks have frozen our expansion accounts. Another call came through. Our largest investors are pulling out. Then another. The acquisition has collapsed. Another. Employees are asking if salaries will be delayed. Daniel could barely breathe. This can't be happening. Across the aisle, Chloe nervously stepped backward. I don't understand. Patricia looked toward Vanessa. You planned this. Vanessa met her gaze. No. She answered quietly. You planned this the day you chose cruelty over decency. Security personnel approached Daniel. One officer spoke respectfully. Mr. Brooks, representatives from the Financial Conduct Authority and commercial fraud investigators would like to speak with you in the adjoining conference room. Daniel stared at him. No. Immediately. His knees weakened. Richard buried his face in his hands. We are finished. Patricia's confidence vanished. She slowly walked toward the stage after the presentation ended. Her proud posture had disappeared. When Vanessa stepped down to greet several international investors, Patricia stopped a few feet away. Vanessa! Vanessa turned. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. I made mistakes. Vanessa remained silent. We were wrong about you. Richard joined his wife. We judged you without knowing who you were. Daniel finally approached. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and the confidence that had once defined him had completely disappeared. I'm sorry. The words barely escaped his lips. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Vanessa looked at the man she had once imagined growing old beside. She remembered the bookstore, the rainy afternoon, the lake, the promises. For a brief moment, she mourned the man he used to be. Then she remembered the birthday cake, the laughter, the divorce papers, the humiliation. Most of all, she remembered that every choice he had made had been entirely his own. You aren't sorry because you hurt me, she said gently. You're sorry because you finally know who I am. Daniel lowered his head. He had no answer. Patricia suddenly fell to her knees. Please. Our family will lose everything. Richard followed. We are begging you. Several executives watched in stunned silence. The very people who had laughed while Vanessa was publicly humiliated were now pleading before her. Vanessa took one slow breath. My grandmother taught me something I will never forget. She looked at each of them. Mercy does not require restoring someone to the position they abused. She turned to Samuel. Ensure Brooks Capital employees receive placement assistance through our partner companies. Samuel nodded. It will be done. Daniel looked up hopefully. And us. Vanessa's expression remained composed. You must live with the consequences of your own decisions. She walked past them, not in triumph, not in bitterness, but in peace. Outside the convention center, reporters crowded around as news spread across the financial world. Headlines appeared within minutes. BROKS Capital LOSES Major Funding. New Carter Chairperson announces corporate reforms. Heiress SAVS EMPLOYES ends executive misconduct. Weeks later, Brooks Capital entered bankruptcy proceedings. Daniel, Patricia, and Richard lost their executive positions, their luxury home, and nearly every asset they had fought so hard to protect. The employees, Vanessa, had insisted on protecting found new opportunities through Carter Global's partner companies, preserving hundreds of families from financial hardship. As for Chloe, she quietly disappeared from Daniel's life before the bankruptcy process was complete, taking with her the dreams that had been built on betrayal. Months later, Vanessa stood in the gardens of Carter Estate beneath the same oak tree where her grandmother had once spoken about character. Samuel approached with a smile. Your grandmother would have been proud. Vanessa looked toward the sunrise. I finally understand what she meant. About what? Real wealth. She smiled softly. It isn't having the power to destroy people. It's having the strength not to become like them. The morning breeze gently stirred the flowers around the estate as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the path ahead. For the first time in many years, Vanessa felt truly free, not because she had won, but because she had refused to let betrayal define the woman she chose to become. 6 months later, the story that had once dominated financial headlines was no longer about the collapse of Brooks Capital. It was about the remarkable transformation of Carter Global Holdings under its new chairperson. Under Vanessa Carter's leadership, the company launched scholarship programs for aspiring entrepreneurs, expanded employee ownership initiatives, and established emergency investment funds to rescue struggling businesses that demonstrated integrity rather than political influence. Industry analysts began referring to her as the quiet reformer because she rarely sought publicity, preferring results over recognition. One crisp autumn morning, Vanessa visited the headquarters long before the workday began. She enjoyed walking through the nearly empty building before executives arrived. It reminded her that every decision made inside those walls affected thousands of families beyond the boardroom. As she passed the reception desk, one of the security officers smiled. Good morning, Ms. Carter. Good morning, Michael. You have a visitor. She paused. A visitor. He doesn't have an appointment, but he asked if he could leave a letter. Vanessa accepted the sealed envelope. The handwriting on the front immediately caught her attention. It belonged to Daniel. She thanked the officer and carried the envelope into her office. For several moments, she simply looked at it. Then she opened it. Inside was a single handwritten page. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for another chance. Instead, he admitted that losing his company had forced him to confront the man he had become. Bankruptcy had stripped away his pride, but it had also revealed how many people he had hurt while chasing status and approval. The final sentence read, I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope that one day I become someone who deserves the kind of love you once gave me. Vanessa quietly folded the letter. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She placed it inside a drawer, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as the closing page of a chapter she would never reopen. That afternoon, Samuel Bennett entered her office carrying another folder. Ready for your next acquisition? Vanessa laughed softly. Always. As they reviewed plans to save another struggling company, she realized something her grandmother had understood all along. Life always gives people opportunities to choose between pride and humility, cruelty and compassion, selfishness and integrity. Daniel had made his choice. She had made hers. Years later, when young entrepreneurs asked Vanessa Carter the secret behind her extraordinary success, she never mentioned the billions she controlled or the companies she owned. She simply smiled and answered, "Never build your future on someone else's humiliation. Success earned through character lasts far longer than success built on arrogance." And somewhere beyond the headlines, beyond the fortune, and beyond the painful memories of a birthday that changed everything, Vanessa finally found the one thing wealth could never buy on its own: peace.